So we continue our discussion of Brachos Daf Daled, where King David HaMelech refers to himself as a chassid, as a pious person, and we've been discussing it at length. And he concludes his declaration, how am I a chassid? How am I a pious person? V'lo od, not only do I get up at the crack of dawn at midnight and study Torah, not only do I get my hands dirty quite literally in the analysis of halachic questions, but v'lo od, not only this, el shekol ma shani oseh ani nimlach b'Mephibosheth Rabbi. Everything I do, I consult with Mephibosheth, my teacher. V'omer lo Mephibosheth Rabbi, and I say to him, Mephibosheth, my teacher, Yafeh danti, Yafeh chiyavti, Yafeh zachisi, Yafeh taharti, Yafeh tamesi, v'lo voshti. Did I judge correctly? Did I, what's the opposite of acquit? Convict correctly? Did I acquit correctly? Did I declare pure correctly? Did I declare impure correctly? And I am not ashamed. So, first of all, a little bit of background, historical background. Who was Mephibosheth? So Mephibosheth, as was pointed out last night, was the son of Yonasan, David's best friend. So it's remarkable. Okay, so let's take a step back. It's remarkable that David HaMelech is referring to his best friend's son as his teacher. Not only this, but remember that Yonasan, David's best friend, was the son of Shaul, King Saul, which means that David has supplanted the royal line of Shaul. And he has really, as a king, there's always a fear that the line that you took over will rebel against you and take you down. We're the real royalty, and you don't have a right to be king. David HaMelech, nonetheless, and in fact, of course, Shaul and all of his properties and everything were essentially taken over by David. Shaul's family lost all of their kingly rights. Mephibosheth, Shaul's grandson, is taken in by David HaMelech as the ward of the crown. And David HaMelech, King David, supports him completely. And he moves to Jerusalem, and he eats by King David's table. So you're talking here about someone who is a junior, David HaMelech's junior, in age, in station of royalty. He's from a disgraced royal line. And he's someone who's beholden unto David HaMelech completely for his livelihood. And not only this, Ben Ish Chai points out something fascinating. He says, normally, you don't call somebody Mephibosheth Rabbi, Mephibosheth my teacher. You refer to him as Rabbi Mephibosheth, my teacher Mephibosheth. This is the correct way. He points out, for example, Yehoshua refers to Moshe Rabbeinu, refers to Moses as Adoni Moshe, my master Moshe. And this is actually our custom, right? We call somebody rabbi before their title, before their name, right? David HaMelech refers to Mephibosheth Rabbi because, in fact, that was not his teacher. David HaMelech had a different teacher who was his formal teacher. Mephibosheth was simply an intelligent young man who was hanging around the court. Now, he was highly intelligent, as we'll see soon, but he didn't have the station that there was any reason whatsoever that David HaMelech, the King David, should see the need to turn to him for advice. And here we find this incredible humility of David HaMelech. You have a question?
No, I just wanted to say, he comes from a family of royalty, so David HaMelech, who didn't have the background in that, and is now king, can look to him to understand certain intricacies of development of the royalty. That's a
fascinating perspective. I would point out that David HaMelech was married to the daughter of King Shaul, so he had that already in his home. And as we've discussed perhaps in the past, that there was some dispute between the two of them, Michal bat Shaul and David HaMelech, about the correct way for a king to comport himself. But your point is very well taken. Nonetheless, it's highly unusual that somebody of such a junior station would be treated with such respect. It was the fact that he took him in as ward of the crown was out of kindness to his friend. Yes, David HaMelech again. David HaMelech King David took Mephibosheth into his home as an act of kindness for his dear friend. But when you have someone who relies on you, it's highly irregular. And you might say that it extends the act of kindness, but it's irregular to make yourself vulnerable to them. And I think it speaks to a very interesting power differential that David HaMelech is seemingly either consciously counteracting or oblivious to. That he goes to somebody who's completely his junior in every sense of the word and treats him as a teacher even when he isn't really his teacher. And this again speaks to David HaMelech's complete humility. I'll point out even further, the Gemara continues. The Ben Ish Chai says, he has a different teacher. What was his teacher's name? Something with an ayin, I forget the name. Huh? Huh? All right, look, I'll tell you right now. Who was his teacher? I'll get it for you later. Who was his real teacher? Huh? He had a different Rebbe. In Sanhedrin Duchtzach it says that he brings a different person who was his actual Rebbe. Again, it's highly improbable that somebody so much younger than him would be considered Rabbo Muvak. Here it is. Ira Hayo'iri. The Gemara in Eruvin says that Ira Hayo'iri was David HaMelech's Rabbo Muvak. Okay, in any case, even further, the Gemara continues and says, Omer Rabbi Yoshua Breder of Idi, Maikra va'adabra be'idosecha neged melachim v'lo evosh. I speak of your testimonies, of your laws before kings, and I am not ashamed. So he's referring here to the fact that he speaks before Mephibosheth. So who is he referring to as a king? Maharsha says, why is he referring to him as a king? Man Malkei Rabbanon. He refers to the rabbi, to a Torah scholar, as royalty. It's an incredible humility on King David's part, that he is royalty, and he, on the other hand, refers to somebody who's teaching Torah and speaking Torah as being Malachim. Maharsha brings a second interpretation, of course, that he is, in a sense, Malachim because he is descended from, albeit but nonetheless descended from royalty. He was a descendant of Shaul, so in that sense he's Malachim. But again, even to say that he's referring to him as royalty is again an incredible sensitivity and incredible kindness and humility on the part of David HaMelech. I want to point out one more thing, which the Ein Yaakov, the Rav Yaakov Ibn Chabib points out a fascinating thing. He says, normally people are humble before God and proud before people. We express our despair to God, and we turn to our fellow people and we put up a front. Everything's okay. How are you? I'm fine. And then mitamo, you see the person comes to daven. This is I find this in conversation with people. I often ask people, "What are you davening for today?" And immediately, a person becomes real. They become more vulnerable. Because when we're just talking with people, we put up that front. With Hashem, we don't put up any fronts. David HaMelech is the opposite. King David is the opposite. To Hashem, he says, Shamro nafshi ki chasid ani. Watch over my soul, because I am pious. To Mephibosheth, he says, Yafidiyanti, Yafichiyafti, am I right? Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. And he allows himself to be embarrassed and to be criticized, despite all the reasons why he might not do that. And so he says it's a powerful lesson, that while it's true that it's natural and even appropriate for us to be vulnerable before Hashem, that doesn't do Hashem any favors. For our own personal comfort, or as we are reactionary, it's natural for us to be vulnerable before God, but that doesn't do God any favors. David HaMelech is the opposite. He says he comes before God like a warrior. He comes before God and he says, I'm here and I'm ready to do everything I have to do in order to serve you. And I'm going to recount before you, and I'm going to be honest. When I stand before Hashem, I'm going to be honest. I have, as we pointed out before, the reason that he is working so hard to be a chassid is because he has some pretty significantly questionable activities in his past that he's trying to counteract here with this work, as we discussed in the past. So he's coming to Hashem and he's saying, I'm working my darndest to confront my mistakes. And I'm continuing to do that. And what can I do more? And to his fellow human being, he says, hit me. Hit me with your best shot. I want to know how I can do better. I want to know how I can be criticized. I want to know how I can be analyzed, and he questions himself in that front. So, and I just want to point out further, the Gemara continues just as a last point about how significant it was. Okay, so again, the Gemara says that Mephibosheth, Lama Nikra Shmo Mephibosheth. Why was he called Mephibosheth? Shahaya Mevayesh Pnei David Bahalacha. He was called Mephibosheth, which means, from my mouth there is shame. Because he put King David to shame in matters of Jewish law. Lefichach, as a result of this, Zacha David v'yatsa mimenu kilov. As a result of this, King David merited to have a son, Kilov. The Talmud continues, V'amar Rabbi Yehuda lo Kilov Shmo. His name is not really Kilov, ela Daniel Shmo. His real name is Daniel. V'lama nikra Shmo Kilov. Why was he called Kilov? Shaya machlim pnei Mephibosheth bahalacha. Because he in turn put Mephibosheth to shame in matters of Jewish law. So I think it's again fascinating that this is Mephibosheth. Again, Mephibosheth is someone who was himself quite vulnerable. And yet, David HaMelech allows himself to be criticized and to be questioned. And in fact, it wasn't just he allowed himself to be. Mephibosheth effectively did Mevayesh Pnei David Bahalacha, did put him to shame in halacha. Should it have been? I don't think that the point here is that that he was disrespectful, but just the fact that when a person is wrong, they feel embarrassed. And one more point. Ben Ish Chai points out another fascinating point. He says, "Yafa danti yafa chiyavti." A normal person, when they ask a question, when they want to know if they made the right decision, they'll say, "Rabbi, I have a theoretical question to ask you. What would the halacha be in such and such question?" And then the way the rabbi answers you, you know if you made the right decision or not. David HaMelech, King David, didn't do that. He goes to Mephibosheth and he says, I had this question. Here is how I paskined. Here is how I ruled. Was it correct or was I not correct? And by doing that, he really makes himself vulnerable, and he allows his psak, he allows his decision to be criticized. And he doesn't save face at all. He really puts his heart, his dignity on the table.
But that's where a leader should be. A leader
Absolutely.
Say what he wants to say, do what he has to do, take responsibility.
That's exactly right. He's a great role model. A great role model of transparency, of vulnerability, and humility. And finally, this was a just one more minute, this was a continuation of David's work as being a person who was a warrior and a fighter, and particularly in the case of Uriah Hachiti, that there was a question about whether blood was spilled. By allowing himself to be embarrassed, he counteracts that idea of shvichas damim, the spilling of blood, and that kind of brute force in his general life. He works again to counteract those traits that he has in a positive way.